Ethiopic or Ge'ez is one of the oldest languages, if not the oldest language we have in the world.
Something was spoken after the resurrection. Words so powerful, they were never meant to reach the outside world. Not written in the scriptures, not preached from any pulpit, not translated until now. In the final moments of his life, an elderly Ethiopian monk, his voice barely more than a breath, pulled his student close and revealed a secret guarded for generations, a secret sealed within the stone walls of a remote mountain monastery. What he whispered was not a story, it was a warning. For nearly 2,000 years, the world has been told the same ending. The tomb is empty, the stone is rolled away, and then silence, as if the most important part of the story was deliberately erased. But what if that silence was never meant to be empty? What if it was meant to hide something? Because far from the eyes of history, deep within the isolated highlands of Ethiopia, there exists another account, preserved by monks who swore their lives to secrecy, protected from empires, untouched by translation, and hidden from the modern world. An account that doesn't just describe the resurrection, but reveals what happened after, what Jesus said, what he warned, what he revealed during the 40 days that followed, days history barely acknowledges, yet may hold the most dangerous truths of all. This is not speculation. This is not myth. This comes from an ancient 81-book Bible, one the rest of the world was never meant to read, a version of Scripture more complete, more direct, and far more unsettling than anything you've ever heard. And within its missing pages lies a message so precise, so urgent, it had to be buried in silence. Today, we break that silence. But before we uncover what the monk revealed in his final breath, make sure to like and subscribe, because what you're about to hear was never meant to be public. And there are powerful reasons why it was kept that way. To grasp what that monk was guarding with his final breath, you first have to realize how radically different the Ethiopian Bible really is. Most people are raised to believe the Bible is complete, finalized, and untouchable, as if it arrived exactly as it is today, straight from heaven. But the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition never accepted that idea, and they've preserved the evidence to challenge it. While the Western world settled on a 66-book canon, Ethiopia held on to 81. That includes texts like Enoch, Jubilees, and Maccabees, writings that were once respected by early Christians and ancient Jewish communities, but later removed from the Western tradition. For a long time, scholars in the West brushed these aside as legends, fabrications, or even dangerous material. Then something changed. Scientific analysis, specifically radiocarbon dating, was performed on the Garima Gospels, discovered inside an Ethiopian monastery. The results placed them between 330 and 650 AD, making them the oldest illustrated Christian manuscripts ever found. While Europe struggled through the chaos of the Dark Ages, Ethiopian monks were quietly safeguarding what could be described as Christianity's original blueprint, untouched, unedited, and independent of Roman authority. And what these preserved texts contain is anything but gentle. Take the Book of Enoch. It doesn't just say humanity became corrupt before the flood. It explains how. It tells of a cosmic intrusion, 200 watcher angels descending to earth, taking human wives, and producing hybrid offspring known as the Nephilim, giants who drained the planet's resources and pushed civilization into collapse. It even names the leaders, Samyaza, Azazel, Barakiel, and claims they handed humanity forbidden knowledge, warfare, seduction, astrology. Secrets never meant to be revealed. This wasn't simple rebellion. It was an illegal transfer of power. And that's exactly why it was rejected by Rome. The world Enoch describes is wild, uncontrollable, impossible to manage through structured religion. So it was removed from the narrative. But Ethiopia never let it go. And as intense as Enoch is, it's only the beginning, because the real revelation, the one that Monk risked everything to protect, is found in a text called the Mashafa Kadan, also known as the Book of the Covenant. And what it claims completely reshapes the story of the resurrection. In the Gospel of Luke, the time between the resurrection and ascension is barely covered. A few verses, Jesus appears, blesses his followers, and ascends. 40 days reduced to a brief summary. But in the Ethiopian account, those 40 days are everything. According to this text, the risen Christ doesn't simply comfort his disciples. He gathers them urgently, like a commander delivering final instructions before departure. And what he shares with them was never written in any Western gospel. He begins with a warning. He describes the material world as a kind of illusion, a domain controlled by a deceptive force, something that manipulates wealth, status, and power to keep people spiritually blind. And then he delivers a statement that, if widely known, could have changed the entire course of religious history. Do not build temples of stone, for stone will fall. Build the temple within your heart, for it cannot be destroyed. In this context, it's not symbolic, it's direct, a clear rejection of organized religious structures. He warns that people will one day wear sacred garments, speak in his name, and gather wealth. He predicts the rise of an empire that will take his symbol, the cross, and turn it into an instrument of power and violence. What unsettles scholars is how specific it feels. It reads almost as if he's witnessing future events. Wars fought in his name, inquisitions, massive religious institutions thriving while the vulnerable are left behind. He tells them plainly, a true believer will not belong to the systems created by men. But his message goes even deeper. He begins describing something that sounds almost like a biological or scientific process within the human being. He says every person carries two forces, two winds. One brings life, the other leads to error. And this second force isn't just about bad choices or sinful thoughts. He describes it as something invasive, almost parasitic, with clear entry points. It enters through greed, through the eyes, when they fixate on what corrupts, through the mouth, when it speaks falsehood. And once it settles in, it doesn't just influence behavior, it hardens the heart. It transforms a living person into what he calls a walking tomb. Think about that. A person who moves, works, eats, scrolls through life. But inside, something has already died. A spiritual emptiness hidden behind normal existence. This wasn't a metaphor for fiction. It was a condition he believed was already spreading. And then he gives them the solution. Not rituals, not ceremonies, not offerings to any institution. He calls it Gnosis, direct, personal knowledge of truth. He teaches them to watch their own thoughts, like guards at a gate, carefully observing what enters and what leaves their mind. And then comes the statement that could have shaken the foundation of institutional religion if it had ever been widely shared. The kingdom of heaven is not far away. It exists within you, hidden in the silence between your thoughts. And that is why this text could never be allowed into the mainstream. Because if people truly believed that, if they understood that the divine wasn't locked inside buildings, but already within them, everything would change. if ordinary people in the Roman Empire truly believed that the divine lived within them, everything would collapse overnight. Temple taxes would lose their power. Fear of religious authorities would vanish. The entire system that positioned priests and bishops as gatekeepers to God would become irrelevant. In the eyes of empire, that kind of belief would make people impossible to control. But the message didn't end with spirituality alone. Within these teachings are statements that, centuries later, seem to echo discoveries made by modern science. It's as if fragments of advanced knowledge were hidden in plain sight. The Book of the Covenant contains descriptions of the natural world that were once dismissed as poetic imagination. It speaks of storehouses of snow and gates of the winds, portraying weather as something that flows through organized pathways, guided by unseen channels across the earth. For generations, that sounded like mythology. Today, meteorology tells a different story. Scientists now understand that global weather moves through defined atmospheric rivers, massive currents of air that circulate the planet at high altitudes, almost like invisible highways in the sky. So how does a text from 2,000 years ago describe something so close to modern atmospheric science? It doesn't stop there. The text also refers to a vast body of water hidden beneath the Earth's surface, something long interpreted as symbolic language. But in 2014, researchers confirmed the existence of an enormous reservoir of water trapped deep within the Earth's mantle, locked inside a mineral called ringwoodite. This underground ocean may contain more water than all the seas on the surface combined. What was once dismissed suddenly didn't seem so impossible. And if these writings were accurate about the waters below us and the currents above us, it raises an unavoidable question. What else did they get right? According to the Mashafa Kadan, Jesus didn't leave his followers with words alone. He passed on a precise method, a disciplined practice reserved for a select inner circle. It involved intentional breathing and the focused direction of thought. Strangely, the description closely mirrors advanced meditative techniques found in traditions across India, Tibet, and other Eastern philosophies. This ties into one of the most debated theories in biblical history, that during the unexplained years of his life, between ages 12 and 30, Jesus may have traveled east, studying within monasteries or spiritual centers far from the Roman world. Because the teachings preserved in the Ethiopian texts carry unmistakable parallels, ideas resembling karma, rebirth, and inner energy systems, all expressed through ancient language. And then comes the statement that binds everything together. The one-line monks have guarded and memorized for nearly 2 millennia. He turns to his disciples and warns them, "Darkness will come, and it will wear my face." Not an obvious enemy, not something easily recognized. A deception so refined it would look exactly like him. Speak in his name, carry his symbol, build monuments in his honor, while quietly becoming the very force that corrupts everything he stood for. In this account, the Antichrist doesn't appear as a destroyer. It arrives as a savior. And the monks who protected this teaching didn't see it as a distant prophecy. They believed it was already unfolding. Ethiopia's commitment to these beliefs isn't just written in ancient texts. It's embedded in its history, its identity, and even its geography. Because no discussion of this story is complete without addressing the most powerful and mysterious artifact in biblical tradition, the Ark of the Covenant. While popular culture imagines the Ark hidden away in some secret government facility, Ethiopia has held a very different claim for over 3,000 years, unwavering and absolute. According to their tradition, The ark is still there, secured within the church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in the ancient city of Axum. This isn't a casual legend. It's the foundation of an entire civilization. The story begins with the Queen of Sheba, who journeys to meet King Solomon in Jerusalem. When she returns to Ethiopia, she carries with her a son, Menelik I. Years later, Menelik travels back to Jerusalem to meet his father. Solomon offers him the throne of Israel, but Menelik declines. Instead, according to Ethiopian tradition, he leaves with something far more significant: the ark itself. As recorded in the Kebra Nagast, Menelik and his companions are said to have replaced the original ark in the Holy of Holies with a replica, quietly transporting the true one back to Ethiopia. And the ark, according to biblical descriptions, was never just symbolic. It was dangerous. It struck down those who touched it improperly. It unleashed bursts of energy that seemed almost supernatural. Entire groups were said to have been destroyed in its presence. When read closely, these accounts sound less like myth and more like exposure to something powerful and unexplained. Even today, the role of guarding the ark is unlike anything else. Only one man at a time is chosen. Once he enters the sacred space, he never leaves again for the rest of his life. And over time, observers have noticed patterns: declining eyesight, physical deterioration, shortened lifespans. These aren't typical signs of devotion. They resemble prolonged exposure to some form of energy. If the ark were merely a gold-covered box, none of this would add up. And history suggests others believed it held real power too. In the 12th century, the Knights Templar are said to have traveled to Ethiopia, possibly searching for it. Their symbols can still be found carved into the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela. They weren't chasing legend. They were searching for something real. And Ethiopia, remarkably, remained independent while much of Africa fell under colonial rule. Even in 1896, when Italy invaded with modern weaponry, Ethiopian forces achieved a decisive victory at the Battle of Adwa. Some accounts speak of an unexplained light appearing on the battlefield. Official history calls it a miracle. Local tradition tells a different story. And perhaps nowhere is Ethiopia's ancient mystery more tangible than in Lalibela itself. In the 12th century, King Lalibela didn't build churches in the conventional sense. He had them carved. 11 massive structures, not constructed upward, but excavated downward into solid volcanic rock. Entire cathedrals, complete with windows, columns, chambers, and drainage systems, all formed from a single, continuous block of stone. There was no room for error. Every cut had to be exact from the beginning, which means the full design of each structure had to exist in perfect detail before the first strike of a tool. Modern engineers who've studied these sites have reached a difficult conclusion. Using only the tools available at the time, such a project would require tens of thousands of workers and well over a century to complete. Yet tradition places it within just a few decades. And then there's the missing stone. Millions of tons of rock were removed, but there's no clear evidence of where it went. No debris fields, no massive waste sites, nothing. The monks offer an explanation. Passed down through generations. Humans worked during the day. At night, something else continued the work. According to these accounts, angels descended and completed the task at twice the speed, using what were described as tools of light, instruments capable of cutting through stone effortlessly. Today, that description sounds less mythical than it once did. We might call it directed energy, laser-like technology. What was once dismissed now feels strangely plausible. Some researchers have even suggested that the ark itself, believed to have been active during that period, could have served as a source of energy. Other ancient civilizations, from Egypt to Mesoamerica, also describe techniques for shaping stone using sound frequencies or chemical processes. Different cultures, different continents, but echoes of the same idea. And the deeper you go into these connections, the harder it becomes to dismiss them as coincidence. If a technology like that truly existed in Ethiopia, it would make Lalibela far less mysterious and far more intentional. Among the 11 rock-hewn churches, the most iconic is the Church of St. George. Its design is almost unreal, a perfect cross carved straight down into the earth so that its roof sits level with the ground. You don't approach it from the front, you stand above it and look down into it. Every angle is precise, every line is exact. At its base, a drainage system cut directly into the rock has protected the structure from seasonal flooding for over 800 years. Even by today's standards, that level of engineering would be impressive. In the 12th century, it feels almost impossible to explain. But the mystery doesn't end at the surface. Beneath the entire complex lies a network of narrow, pitch-black tunnels. Those training for the priesthood are sent into these passageways alone, without light, forced to rely only on touch, sound, and their own voice as they chant their way through. It's more than a test. It's a ritual of total sensory deprivation, carved into stone itself, a physical expression of the teachings found in the Book of the Covenant. Before you reach the light, you must first pass through darkness. Recent 3D laser scans have revealed something even more intriguing. Sealed chambers hidden beneath the floors, spaces that haven't been opened in over 800 years. According to the priests, these chambers hold sacred treasures, ancient manuscripts, possibly even the original tools used to carve the churches, but no one is allowed inside. King Lalibela himself is said to have spent time in Jerusalem before its fall, and his vision was clear: to recreate a new Jerusalem in Africa, one that could never be conquered, never be reshaped by empire. He even named the river flowing through the region after the Jordan. Within the stone walls, symbols from multiple traditions are carved side by side: the Star of David, the Christian cross, and the ancient solar swastika, a symbol of the sun that existed thousands of years before it was ever corrupted in modern history. This wasn't random decoration. It was a deliberate fusion, a preservation of sacred ideas from different paths, unified and encoded into stone, meant to endure forever. And endure it has. While countless European cathedrals were reduced to rubble during the World Wars, Lalibela remained untouched. It still stands today, unchanged, almost as if it exists outside of time. But Lalibela, the Ark, and the 81 sacred books all seem to point towards something deeper: a lineage, a hidden bloodline. In Western Christianity, Jesus is often presented as a singular figure: no descendants, no continuing family. The story ends at the cross and resumes in the heavens. But in Ethiopia, that idea doesn't quite fit. There, family isn't just part of identity, it is identity. The Solomonic dynasty of Ethiopia ruled for nearly 3,000 years, from around 900 BC until 1974. A continuous royal line, unbroken across centuries. The final emperor, Haile Selassie, was counted as the 225th ruler in that lineage. His official title? The Conquering Lion of the Tribe of Judah. Not just symbolic, but a direct claim of descent from King David. And when you follow that lineage closely, something unexpected happens. It doesn't just connect Ethiopia to the Old Testament, it begins to overlap with the New. If Mary, the mother of Jesus, was part of the house of David, and Ethiopia's royal line traces back to that same origin, then the link between Ethiopia and Christ isn't just theological. It becomes familial, literal. This is one reason why, in the 20th century, the Rastafarian movement identified Haile Selassie as a messianic figure. The Book of Revelation speaks of the returning Lion of Judah, a title Selassie carried. He never claimed divinity, but he understood exactly what his ancestry represented. Then, modern genetics entered the picture. DNA studies of Ethiopian populations have revealed ancient genetic markers linked to the Levant, regions that include modern-day Israel and Syria, dating back roughly 3,000 years. Not legend, not mythology, actual human migration, written into DNA itself, which means those ancient oral traditions may have been recording real history all along. This also helps explain why Ethiopian Christianity feels so different from what's practiced in the West. Observances like the Saturday Sabbath are still kept. Circumcision on the 8th day is still practiced. Dietary laws remain intact. These weren't later additions. They were never abandoned, because the tradition itself was never fully separated from its original roots. And that leads to perhaps the most controversial idea in this entire narrative, one that, once considered, is hard to ignore. If Jesus survived the crucifixion, as some lesser-known ancient sources suggest, and needed to disappear somewhere beyond the reach of Rome, where would he go? What safer place than a kingdom connected to his own extended lineage, a nation already proven to protect sacred knowledge at any cost? In the remote highlands of Ethiopia, there are oral accounts passed down through generations. They speak of a mysterious figure who arrived from the north, a teacher, a healer, a man who spoke with a wisdom unlike anything people had heard before. They don't call him Jesus, they call him the Righteous One. And to this day, no one has been able to fully explain who he was. As Ethiopian monks often say, the West has the water, but we have the well. And now, after nearly 2,000 years of silence, that well is beginning to open. Which brings us to a question most people never stop to ask. Why now? Why are these texts suddenly surfacing after centuries of near-total secrecy? For generations, these manuscripts were hidden in mountain monasteries, wrapped in animal skins, guarded by men who dedicated their entire lives to protecting them. They survived insects, invasions, political upheaval, even the fall of empires. Because the monks weren't simply preserving old writings. They were guarding something far more important. They weren't just protecting ancient writings. They were holding a seal in place. And then, almost suddenly, everything starts to surface. Within just a few years, material that had been hidden for centuries begins appearing online. Independent translations spread without authorization. Algorithms pick them up and push them further. People who had never even heard the name Mashafa Kadan are now encountering it. Between headlines, short videos, and endless scrolling feeds, including this one. That kind of exposure doesn't feel random. In fact, the most radical interpretation of the Ethiopian texts themselves offers an explanation that's hard to ignore. The Mashafa Kadan describes the final age as a time of illusionary webs. In its original language, the description points to a world that is deeply interconnected, but fundamentally deceptive. A reality where communication happens without voices and perception happens without direct sight. A world filled with signals, but stripped of truth. Read that carefully. It sounds uncomfortably similar to the internet, to social media, even to the early rise of artificial intelligence. The idea is this: the Ethiopian monks weren't simply preserving sacred knowledge. They were safeguarding something more like an emergency guide, a set of instructions meant to be released at a very specific point in human history. And that moment might be now. According to the text, when humanity becomes fully immersed in constructed realities, when illusion begins to replace truth, that's when the hidden knowledge must be revealed to disrupt it. Look around. Public trust in governments is at historic lows. Confidence in media continues to erode. Organized religion is losing its grip faster than ever before. And yet people aren't just searching for information. They're searching for something deeper, something real, something direct. A connection that doesn't rely on institutions standing in between them and truth. That's exactly what these texts claim to offer. And it may explain why they're spreading the way they are. Back in 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea formalized what would become the Western biblical canon. On the surface, it appears as a process of organization, simplifying scripture for a broader audience. But viewed through the lens of the Ethiopian tradition, it looks very different. It looks like something was removed on purpose, not because it lacked credibility, but because it presented a different view of humanity. Those excluded texts describe human beings as spiritually empowered, capable of direct connection with the divine, without needing priests, hierarchies, or institutions to mediate that relationship. Remove those ideas, and you don't just edit a book. You reshape how people understand their own power. Ethiopia never accepted that edit. They preserved the complete collection, while the rest of the world inherited a reduced version. And some portions of these preserved writings don't even read like theology. They read like science. Researchers have pointed to passages that resemble what we now call acoustic levitation, the ability to influence matter using highly controlled sound frequencies. Now think about Lalibela. Think about the scale, the precision, the unanswered questions about how it was built. Then consider the traditional explanation that angels completed the work using tools of light. Replace that phrase with advanced energy or sound-based technology. And suddenly, the gap between legend and possibility starts to shrink. If knowledge like that is encoded within the Book of the Covenant, and if modern efforts are beginning to decode it, then this isn't just about religion. It suggests the reappearance of something much older, a form of knowledge that may have existed long before recorded history and was intentionally buried, which leads to a question that lingers long after all of this. If powerful institutions reshaped the past to control the present, what else is still being kept out of view? And if a monk, at the very end of his life, chose to reveal a secret he had protected for decades, what does that say about how urgent that truth has become? The seal is no longer intact. The texts are no longer hidden. What remains uncertain is whether the world is ready to truly understand them. If this made you think differently, even for a moment, hit like and subscribe, because this story goes much deeper, and what comes next is even more revealing.